Path of Exile 2's early access launch inches ever closer, and we've been getting little bits of new information here and there on the road to that November 15th launch date. The most recent info dump came from the Tokyo Game Show, where journalists were able to pull quite a bit of new information on new keystones, abilities, and the topic of today's video, new item base types. Now, these base types are of course low-level bases because we're yet to see any high-level endgame footage of Path of Exile 2. But if Path of Exile 1 is anything to go by, base types usually have high-level versions that are somewhat similar, if not identical in design, only with more base stats on those high-level versions. So these base types are fun to look at to see what we can expect in PoE 2. So let's get straight into it, beginning with the Solar Amulet. Now, I just made a video a few days back talking about the mechanics of Spirit in PoE 2, and it looks like you're going to be able to invest quite heavily into Spirit with various item slots, including at least the Amulet implicit as seen here, but possibly also Amulet explicit modifiers to provide a lot more of this stat. Spirit will be the resource that a character will use to reserve any reservation abilities, which includes the skills we're already familiar with in this role, such as auras or herald skills, but it also includes meta trigger gems. So trigger-based builds may need to invest further into Spirit to be able to use those reservations in addition to any auras they want to run. Now, speaking of trigger gems reserving Spirit, this change is really important because it indirectly buffs self-cast builds, and that's where we should move on to the next new base type, the Pearl Ring, which grants cast speed as its implicit. Self-cast builds in PoE 2 won't need as much Spirit as trigger-based builds, or alternatively they can invest the extra Spirit that they have into more auras or other reservation skills like Herald of Lightning or Arctic Armor, for example. This new ring base type will also make cast speed a bit more accessible as a stat for those builds, especially earlier in progression when crafting a good ring with other needed stats can be quite difficult. Next up we have the Icicle Flail. Now, this is a flail which is a new weapon type in PoE 2, but more importantly, this weapon deals pure cold damage as the base damage stat, which is something we saw a little bit of back at ExileCon 2023. This idea that weapons wouldn't only have base physical damage, but actually have different base damage types. Now, this brings into question how exactly you'll scale this damage using explicit modifiers. Currently in PoE 1, the base types for weapons only have base physical damage, which is then scaled using local explicit modifiers for added flat physical damage and increased physical damage. In PoE 1, you can roll modifiers which provide added elemental or chaos damage, but you can't roll modifiers which provide local increased elemental or chaos damage, like you can for physical damage. However, in the most recent league, Settlers of Kalgur, we have a weapon enchantment which provides increased elemental damage, and this is a local modifier. It directly scales any flat added elemental damage that you have on the weapon. Can we expect these types of local increases to exist for other damage types in PoE 2? And if so, will they be rollable on any base, or will it be specific to the base type? For example, it would make sense if this Icicle Flail could roll a local increased cold damage modifier to scale the weapon's base damage, but we'll have to wait and see how exactly that pans out. Now, in the same trail of thought, we have another new base type, the Cultist Greathammer. This one has two different types of base damage on the weapon, a larger amount of physical damage and a much smaller amount of fire damage. This is a two-handed mace, and the implicit provides a melee splash support-like benefit of being able to deal that damage to targets near the initial strike target. Once again, there's the question of how you'll be able to scale this damage with crafting. I'm really interested to find out more about that. Next, we have the Bloodletting Dagger. This implicit makes 25% of your spell mana costs cost life instead, so it's certainly targeted as a spellcaster dagger, but it's interesting to see that this is not a rune dagger. I'm actually not sure if I've seen any rune dagger bases for PoE 2, so it's possible that those won't be making a return. This dagger really plays into the concept that skill costs and resource upkeep are going to be much more of a mechanic that the average build will interact with in PoE 2, and I expect this type of implicit will be quite powerful in helping to manage your mana sustain. Next, the Jingling Crest Shield. Now we know that in PoE 2 you'll be able to use an active block ability which allows the character to raise their shield up in front of them to block incoming projectiles and strikes. And I speculated a bit recently if this would be a skill that you would gain which would then be supportable like other skills, or if it would just be a mechanic similar to the dodge roll, but only obtained from shields. And it appears, at least from this base type, that it will be a supportable skill, Raise Shield. I love the concept of an active block, and the idea of this being a supportable skill is awesome. I wonder what interesting support options they may come up with for this one. Super excited to see that. There's also this Jade Club here which isn't too interesting, at least that's what I thought until I spotted one very strange thing. This is a one-handed mace and it requires 149 intelligence to equip. Part of Exile 1 maces are all strength-based weapons, they only require strength to equip, which makes sense thematically. It's possible that this is a typo or an error on the PoE 2 database website, either in terms of the required stat being intelligence instead of strength, or it's possible that this is actually a scepter or a wand base and is labelled as a one-handed mace in error, though the name Jade Club certainly suggests a mace. If it does indeed require a huge chunk of intelligence to equip, that is certainly intriguing. The Jade Club has the Always Hits implicit, which is basically Vagan's hits cannot be evaded modifier from Betrayal for those of us who play PoE 1. Now we've already heard that accuracy is going to be more of a range from target mechanic in PoE 2, where melee requires less accuracy than say a ranger using a bow from a great distance. So considering this implicit is on a melee weapon, I wonder how useful it will be. Now lastly for this video, I wanted to briefly discuss something else, a new ability, Hand of Chayula. This skill is so cool and it has some awesome new tech which doesn't exist in PoE 1. You'll be able to use this ability while you have a weapon equipped, in this case a quarterstaff, and it will still perform an unarmed strike. The skill applies linked curses on hit, so even if it doesn't deal a lot of damage, it's going to provide useful utility. We even have some footage here of the animation, which appears to be one of the breach hands that come out of the ground in PoE 1, which grows from the character's fist. That looks amazing. We're just 36 days out from that early access launch date and probably about 3 weeks out from the live stream to find out everything we're going to be doing in the early access. Thanks for watching this video, and thank you for your ongoing support. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.